In 2018, inside a laboratory at Sapienza University in Rome, a researcher picked up a drill no thicker than a pencil and brought it to a skull fragment 2,000 years old. The bone had been pulled from a necropolis along the Appian Way, the very road Rome's legions marched down to conquer the world. The drill found the densest point of the skull. A small, impenetrable fortress sitting deep behind the ear. The petrous bone. The hardest bone in the human body. The only place where DNA can survive 2,000 years of moisture, bacteria, and Roman sun. A fine white powder came out. Inside that dust was the answer to a question Italians had been asking themselves for 2,000 years. Who were the Romans, really? The answer destroyed everything. The version everyone knows goes something like this. There was Romulus. There were 7 hills. There were hard, weathered Latin farmers who built a republic, conquered the known world, and passed their blood, clean, direct, unbroken, down to modern Italians. That is why standing inside the Colosseum feels personal. That is why the language still echoes. That is why the myth of an eternal people endures. For most of the 20th century, this story rested on 3 pillars: language, archaeology, and blood tests taken from living people. Scientists sampled modern Italians, analyzed blood types and mitochondrial DNA, and found what they were looking for. The connection to antiquities seemed confirmed. The story was clean. It was beautiful. It fit perfectly inside a textbook. But nobody had tested the bone itself. Until now. The problem with the old methods was not the science. The problem was that they were looking in the wrong place. Mitochondrial DNA passes only through the maternal line. That means for every generation, you are seeing one person out of thousands. Using mitochondrial DNA to reconstruct an entire population is like trying to understand the demographics of a city by interviewing one person per household, and only asking about their mother's side. You see one thread. But the human genome is not a thread. It is a thick rope woven from thousands of simultaneous stories. Whole genome sequencing of ancient DNA, ADNA, allowed scientists, for the first time, to see the entire rope. Every thread. Every knot. Every break. And when researchers applied this method to bones pulled from Roman cemeteries, the data on the screen stopped matching what was written in the history books. Before we talk about Rome, we need to understand something. By the time Romulus allegedly drew his line around the hill, the population of the Italian peninsula had already been completely rewritten. Twice. From scratch. Layer 1, the survivors. 12,000 years ago, the Apennines were home to hunter-gatherers. Dark skin. Light eyes. Lives built around caves and coastlines. They arrived after the last ice age, retreating northward from southern Refugia where they had outlasted the cold. Their DNA exists in modern Italians today, but only as a faint trace. They were the first people here. Almost nothing of them remains. Layer 2, the farmers. 8,000 years ago, farmers from the coast of Anatolia, from what is now Turkey, began moving west. They carried grain, pottery, and a completely different genome. Over the course of several centuries, they replaced between 70 and 85% of the genetic material across Europe. This was not a war in any conventional sense. It was a demographic replacement of such magnitude that the hunter-gatherers simply dissolved into the new majority. These Anatolian farmers are the true biological foundation of modern Italians. Not the Romans. Not the Gauls. Peasants from the shores of the Aegean Sea. Layer 3, the warriors. 5,000 years ago, nomads from the Pontic Caspian steppe, the vast grasslands north of the Black Sea, pushed westward. They brought horses, the wheel, bronze, and the Proto-Indo-European languages from which Latin would eventually grow. In modern Italians, their signature accounts for somewhere between 20 and 30% of the genome. So by the Bronze Age, the population of the peninsula was already a layered mixture of Anatolian farmers and steppe nomads. The original hunter-gatherers were gone. By the time the Etruscans and Latins appeared, there were no original Italians. There never had been. Now comes the part nobody expected. In 2019, a study published in the journal Science analyzed the DNA of 127 individuals buried in Rome between 200 BCE and 700 CE. The results were so surprising that the authors ran the numbers multiple times. Imperial Rome, at the height of its power, was genetically closer to Syria and Lebanon than to modern northern Italy. Approximately 50% of the genomes recovered from Roman-era burials carried Eastern Mediterranean admixture. Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, Greece. Not northern barbarians. Not Germanic tribes sweeping down from the forests. The East. How did this happen? Rome created the ancient world's first truly globalized demographic engine. 1 million people inside a single city. Slaves imported from every province, from Britain to Mesopotamia, but overwhelmingly from the East, because the East was wealthier, more educated, and closer. Freed slaves who received citizenship and vanished into the Roman social fabric. Merchants, soldiers, and administrators from the eastern provinces. Christian communities arriving from Judea. Within 4 generations, roughly 100 years, the demographic composition of Rome had shifted beyond recognition. Rome conquered the Near East. But the Near East repopulated Rome. The Latin language remained. Roman law remained. The triumphal arches remained. But the people standing beneath those arches already carried the genomes of Alexandria and Antioch. Rome built an eternal city. But it did not build an eternal people. This is where the central contradiction emerges. If the population of Rome changed so radically, why didn't Latin disappear? Why didn't Roman culture dissolve into something unrecognizable? The answer lies in what geneticists now call the Etruscan paradox. The Etruscans were the mysterious civilization that dominated northern Italy before Rome rose to power. Their language was unlike anything spoken around them. For generations, scholars debated their origins. Did they arrive from the East? Did they emerge locally? In 2023, genetic analysis of Etruscan remains settled the question. The Etruscans were local. Their genome fit cleanly within the Bronze Age context of the Italian peninsula. There was no migration from the East. But their language vanished. Completely. While their genes did not. That is the paradox. Culture and genetics follow entirely different rules. A language can be adopted within 2 generations. A religion within 1. A name can be changed in a single afternoon. But the bone record's a different story, the story of the body, not the story that the body chose to tell. Genetic ancestry does not predict cultural identity. It never did. A man who spoke Latin, sacrificed to Jupiter, and called himself Roman could carry the genome of an Egyptian grain merchant. That does not make him less Roman. It makes the word Roman exactly what it always was, a choice, not a bloodline. Modern Italy is not a single genome. It is an archipelago. Northern Italians, Piedmont, Lombardy, Veneto, are genetically far closer to the French and Swiss. They carry a measurable signature from the Lombards and other Germanic groups who arrived during the migration period. These were not ruling elites who imposed a language and disappeared. They came as families, as villages, as entire tribes resettling new land. Southern Italians and Sicilians are genetically closer to Greeks and Maltese. The Anatolian layer runs deeper here. The legacy of Magna Graecia, the ancient Greek colonies that once lined these shores, is written into the biology of the region. And somewhere in the middle of the Tyrrhenian Sea sits Sardinia. Sardinia is a living time capsule. Because of its geographic isolation, the island absorbed almost none of the steppe migrations of the Bronze Age, and very little of the eastern Mediterranean demographic shift of the imperial period. Modern Sardinians are genetically closer to the Neolithic Anatolian farmers than almost any other population in Europe. Sardinia is Europe before Rome. Before the steppe. Before the empires. Walk out onto a street in Naples, Milan, or Palermo today. Look at the people around you. Every single one of them is a 12,000-year-old crossroads. Inside their bones is the memory of an Anatolian farmer, a steppe horseman, a Levantine merchant, a Greek colonist, a Lombard settler. None of those people knew they were Italian. That word came much later. Identity is not what the bone records. Identity is what people choose to remember. But the bone remembers everything else. And the next petrous bone pulled from a necropolis somewhere beneath Naples or Ravenna could rewrite this story again. Subscribe, so you don't miss the moment history rewrites itself again. And tell us in the comments, which nation's DNA do you want us to decode next?